Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on desktop support key performance indicators. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I will pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This particular webcast typically lasts about an hour and 15 minutes. So for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 or so Eastern Time in the United States. Now I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. For those who are not familiar with MetricNet, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas. My role in the company is to manage the desktop support, service desk, and call center benchmarks for MetricNet. The work we do for IT service and support groups worldwide spans the gamut from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the support groups that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that objective through benchmarking. Now, for those who have not been to our new website yet, I would encourage you to go and take a look around at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we offer a free premium membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our online content. This includes our metric of the month, our webcast recordings, our white papers and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form and you will be enrolled as a free premium member. Each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library to access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. Now, since the question of how to benchmark comes up in every webcast we conduct, I will preempt the question right now and give you just a brief overview of MetricNet's benchmarking lineup. There are three ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, there are peer group benchmarks that compare your desktop support group, service desk, or call center to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop button, and you will see our industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Regardless of how or when you choose to benchmark your support organization, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We are active on all the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts, tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of IT service and support professionals and to provide you with tools, insights, and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter during the webcast, use hashtag MetricNetLive and share your thoughts, key points, questions, or just follow along. Now, for those who attended MetricNet's presentations at the HDI conference last week in Orlando, Florida, I want to thank you. I presented on the topic of leveraging KPIs to maximize the ROI of support. There's a companion white paper that goes along with that presentation entitled Service and Support as a Business. I would encourage you to download that white paper from our website if you're interested. I also presented on the topic of the 80-20 rule for desktop support KPIs. In fact, what I will be presenting today is essentially the same presentation I delivered last week at the HDI conference. So if you saw my HDI presentation on the 80-20 rule for desktop support KPIs, you're welcome to stay for today's webcast, but I just want to give you a heads up that it's the same material that you saw last week. One final note before we get started, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of the presentation. This survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 3 questions long and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful. And in return for that courtesy, I'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Most of you are probably familiar with the paradigm that I've shown on this page, the idea of people, process, and technology. Now, this paradigm is not unique to IT service and support. In fact, in many industries, in many process-oriented industries and transaction-oriented industries, most people instinctively buy into this paradigm of people, process, and technology. It has intuitive appeal because many believe that the initial investment and the most important investment is in your people. That is, you recruit effectively, you train them well, you give them tools to do their jobs effectively, you give them performance targets, you deliver effective feedback and coaching, and you hold them accountable for their performance. Now, in order to enable them to do their job effectively, you build repeatable processes. In this particular industry, we're talking about ITSM processes, IT service management processes, within an ITIL framework. By creating those repeatable processes, you create consistency at the customer service interface, and customers like that. And then the top of the pyramid is technology. Now, technology is meant to be a slave to people and process. In other words, it doesn't drive process or people. Rather, people and process drive the technology. Now, I think many in this industry are under the mistaken impression that if you invest enough in technology, that you will have a great service desk or a great desktop support organization. But our data shows something quite a bit different. In fact, if you look at technology investment per seat supported or per end user, what we found is that those that have invested less in technology actually perform better than those who invest more in technology. Now, that is not a general indictment of technology. Rather, I think it's a symptom of the fact that those organizations that spend more on technology are sometimes under the mistaken belief that if you invest enough in technology in your service and support organization, you're going to have great service and support. But really, nothing could be further from the truth. By investing first in people, then in process, and then using technology to automate certain processes and reduce cycle time on certain processes, you can improve the quality of those processes. But ultimately, technology needs to be driven by people and process. And the data we have shows that those with relatively rudimentary technology can do extremely well in IT service and support, whereas those who invest or overinvest in technology oftentimes don't do as well. Now, I want to propose a variation on this paradigm. Specifically, what I want to propose is that there's an even more fundamental building block, and that building block is metrics, or key performance indicators. And the thought here is that if you can't measure your performance, how can you possibly improve your performance? And if all you're doing is measuring your performance and identifying strengths and weaknesses, that doesn't go so far as to result in actions that improve your performance over time. So what I would like to propose, and I've got some data to back this up, this is not supposition on my part, this is not a hypothesis, this is not an academic exercise or musings. We actually have data that supports the idea that performance metrics are even more important than people, process, and technology. Let me explain what I mean. We've been at this for a long time now, more than 25 years. And during that period of time, MetricNet has completed more than 3,000 IT service and support benchmarks. We're on track this year to do about 300 desktop support benchmarks and roughly the same number of service desk benchmarks. Our global database tracks more than 70 key performance indicators, everything from first contact resolution rate and customer satisfaction in the service desk to mean time to resolve and cost per ticket at desktop support. We've also identified and cataloged, we've created a taxonomy, if you will, of more than 120 industry best practices that address strategy, human resource management, process and procedure, technology, performance measurement, and what we call stakeholder communication. Now, when we do these benchmarks, we don't just look at the quantitative metrics. We're not just looking at things like cost per ticket, customer satisfaction, mean time to resolve. We're also looking at processes. And the reason we do that is that process drives performance. They are two sides of the same coin. You see, if a benchmark just has a bunch of key performance indicators in it, it's not very diagnostic because KPIs are driven by the underlying processes. And so when I say that they are two sides of the same coin, they're sort of like yin and yang. You can't improve performance without adjusting, modifying, or adopting new or different processes that enable you to improve that performance. So process drives performance. And when we do these process assessments in every one of our benchmarks, we look at 6 key areas. I just mentioned them. But we look at IT service and support strategy. We look at human resource management. We look at ticket handling processes. We look at technology. We look at the discipline of performance measurement and management. And we look at stakeholder communication. For the purposes of this presentation, I want to drill down in this performance measurement and talk a little bit about the holistic discipline of performance measurement and management. For performance measurement in desktop support, we've identified 14 key success factors. Now, most of these are pretty obvious. Many of our clients have read these and then looked at us and said, well, yeah, that's pretty common sense, but it's surprising how few organizations do even 5 of these, let alone all 14 of them. I'll read just a couple of them off for you here. Cost per ticket is measured, recorded, and tracked. So is customer satisfaction. First contact resolution rate for incidents. It's kind of like first contact resolution rate at level 1, but it's for incident resolution in desktop support. You're looking at first level resolution rate. You're looking at technician utilization. You're using desktop support KPIs to establish stretch goals and so on and so forth. So these are 14 success factors that we have observed empirically from these 3,000 plus IT service and support benchmarks. We simply ask ourselves, what do the best have in common when it comes to the 6 areas that we were just looking at? But when it comes to performance measurement specifically, these are the 14 common success factors that we find among those organizations. Now, we rank these organizations on a scale of 1 to 5. If they have no knowledge whatsoever of the best practice, they get a ranking of a 1. That's why these cells are over here on the right. This is actually a worksheet that we use at MetricNet, and we put a number 1 through 5. We sometimes put fractional numbers in here, like 3.5 or 4.5 or 1.5. But these cells over here on the right are to be used by MetricNet when we do a benchmark, and we establish the level of maturity in their performance measurement and management discipline using this scale here. At the opposite extreme, you have those that are at a 5. They're applying the best practice, and they're applying it in a world-class fashion. Now, when I look back on the last 6 months of desktop support benchmarks that we have done, I just ran this regression a couple of weeks ago in preparation for the HDI conference. N equals 143 benchmarks, desktop support benchmarks done in the last 6 months. And we look at the metrics maturity ranking. Remember, scale of 1 to 5. 1 says you know nothing about the best practice. 5 says that you're applying it in a world-class fashion. So we take a look at these 143 worksheets. We average up the scores, and we put them on this axis here. So the x-axis indicates the level of maturity in the performance measurement and management discipline. The y-axis here is the desktop support balance score. Now, if you've been on a MetricNet webcast before, you know how the scorecard works. If you have not been on a webcast with MetricNet before, or you were not at one of the presentations last week at the HDI conference, I'm going to explain and show you how this scorecard is created in about 10 minutes. But take my word for it for now that your score can range from 0%. We started the axis here at 10%, but your score can range from 0 to 100%. No one has ever achieved 100%, and no one's ever been at 0%. But here's the interesting conclusion. The blue diamonds are data points. The red line is the linear regression through that data. As you become more mature with your performance measurement and management, your overall performance, your balance score, actually increases. This is not a spurious correlation. This is a cause and effect relationship. Now again, I'm going to explain how this balanced scorecard is created momentarily, but it's important to recognize that my supposition back here that we believe that metrics, that is, are an even more fundamental building block than people, process, or technology is borne out by the data. As the maturity improves around performance measurement and management, so too does overall performance. Now, with all this benchmarking data that we collect, at the beginning of every year, MetricNet sits down and we put together what we believe to be the 10 most important megatrends for the coming year. In January of this year, these were the 10 megatrends that we came up with. They're in no particular order, but the one I put at the top is what I call the holistic use of key performance indicators and benchmarking. And by the way, some of these trends show up year after year after year. They don't go away after just 1 year. Many of them stay on this list for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. I won't go through all of them, but others include process optimization through ITIL and ITSM, user self-help, self-service, desktop virtualization, understanding total cost of ownership and first-level resolution rate. And last week, in my second presentation, I talked extensively about the widespread adoption of ROI analysis and service and support as a business. But right now, what I want to talk about is the holistic use of key performance indicators, and I want to define what I mean by that. Now, we've all heard the expression, if you're not measuring it, you're not managing it. Now, there's variations on this theme. What gets measured gets treasured, but there is a whole lot more to the story. Specifically, historically, support organizations have spent a lot of time measuring their performance. 75% on average. If you look at the performance measurement and management discipline, which includes measuring performance, analyzing performance, developing action plans to improve performance, and then acting, that is doing something to improve performance, the focus was on measurement. There was a little bit of analysis done, a tiny bit of action planning, but very little action resulted from these KPIs. This is historically how KPIs were viewed. They were viewed as a passive activity, much like a microscope. If you're observing a slide or an experiment or something, the microscope is not meant to meddle in that experiment. It is meant to observe. And historically, many in service and support viewed KPIs as just that. They were an observation mechanism, but they were not viewed as an active part of managing IT service and support. But the value increases as you move up this pyramid. In other words, analysis is far more valuable than measurement, and prescription is even more valuable. That is, action planning is more valuable than the analysis. And ultimately, the actions that you take in your service and support organization have far more impact than any measures that you look at. So what has emerged in the last 3 to 5 years is what we call the holistic approach to performance measurement and management. It de-emphasizes the KPIs and the specific process of measurement, and it overemphasizes the analysis of those measures, the action planning step, which we call prescription, and then action itself. So it essentially turns this pyramid upside down. Think of it this way. We've got 4 components of our megatrend model, our holistic use of key performance indicators. Those are measurement, diagnosis, prescription, and action or implementation. You'll notice that they are arrayed around the central objective, not of customer satisfaction, but of customer enthusiasm. We believe at MetricNet that customer satisfaction is a losing proposition. We believe that if you don't have enthusiastic customers, you don't have loyal customers. If you don't have enthusiastic customers, you don't have customers that are going to propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals. And if your customers are not enthusiastic about doing business with you, they don't do business with you by choice. And so this model is arrayed around the central objective of generating customer enthusiasm. Let me give you a medical analogy here. If you go to the doctor for an annual physical or because you're not feeling well, typically one of the first things that doctor does is take some measurements. They might measure your blood pressure, your temperature. They might do some blood work. They might do an EKG. They might do there could be a lot of different measurements. But a good doctor isn't going to say, gee, your temperature is elevated and your blood pressure is high. Go home and get better. Because they haven't diagnosed you. A good doctor is going to take those measurements and diagnose what's going on with you. And then they're going to go a step further and they're going to develop an action plan for you, a prescription, not necessarily a prescription for drugs, but it could be that. It might be a prescription for change in lifestyle. Stop smoking, drink less, sleep more. It might be a prescription for surgery. It could be a lot of different things, but ultimately as the patient, it is up to you to implement that action plan. Now, these operate synergistically. You don't have to be great in any one of these 4 areas to have a great desktop support measurement and management function. You just have to be above average in each of these 4 areas. They are synergistic, they reinforce each other, and they supplement each other. But you have to pay attention to all 4 of these in order to holistically use key performance indicators and fully exploit the competitive advantage that is possible by using key performance indicators. Now on page 25, I've introduced the first set of KPIs for desktop support. There's 30 KPIs here. We've organized them into 7 categories. We've got cost metrics, quality metrics, productivity metrics, service level, technician, workload metrics, and then ticket handling metrics. Now, I don't want to mislead you into thinking that this is the complete list of KPIs. There literally are hundreds more. I mean, I've seen all sorts of metrics that are quite unusual and quite creative. But these represent the most common metrics that I see in this industry. There are about 30 of them. Now, these are organized by type of metric: cost, service level, quality, productivity, and so on. I want to give you a slightly different way of thinking about these metrics. 3 broad buckets shown here on page 26. There are macro measures, there are underlying drivers, and then there are what we call workload metrics or causal factors. Let me discuss each one of these. The macro measures tell an interesting story about your cost and your customer satisfaction. And they're good for communicating, particularly to lay people that may not understand desktop support. It's good for communicating a story for how desktop support is doing. But you cannot control these metrics directly. If I go in to do an assessment or a benchmark of a desktop support organization and the manager says, gee, our cost per ticket is high and our customer satisfaction is low, I can't go out there and just tweak customer satisfaction or tweak cost per ticket. But what I do have control over are the underlying drivers. These are the productivity metrics, the service level metrics, the technician metrics, and the ticket handling metrics. They drive the macro measures. They drive performance, and you have control over these metrics. It's through these metrics that you can influence the macro measures and over time improve your performance. Now, there's a third class of metrics, workload metrics, which are driven by the causal factors. These factors define the volume and mix of work performed by desktop support. You don't have much control over these. They are a function of your IT environment. Now, this is particularly important, so I'm going to expand on this because we get questions almost every day from clients who call us up and say, gee, I've got 2,200 people, 2,200 end users in my environment. How many desktop support techs do I need? Well, I'll tell you, that's about the worst question you can ask. And anybody who answers that particular question is committing malpractice, because the number of technicians you need is largely independent of the number of end users you have. What it is dependent upon is the mix and count of the devices that you're supporting. Mix, for example, how many desktops versus laptops do you have? We all know that laptops require more care and feeding than desktop computers do. How many mobile devices do your end users have? On average in North America now, in a typical corporation, your end users have almost 3 devices. Between a laptop computer, a tablet computer, a desktop computer, a smartphone, some even have printers and servers in their offices, but your average knowledge worker now has almost 3 devices. Now, the age of those devices will, to a certain extent, and the refresh rate will, to a certain extent, drive the volume of work associated with those devices, as will how standardized your desktop environment is. Is it locked down, or is it a free-for-all? Is it a BYOD environment, bring your own device environment? Your user population density has an enormous impact on the headcount that you need for desktop support. If you're in a high-rise building where your end users are kind of tightly packed in, your travel time per ticket, which this will come up a few times in this presentation, is going to be pretty short. It doesn't take you very long to get to the site of the user, do the troubleshooting, fix whatever the problem is, and then go to your next ticket or go back to wherever it is that you work from. So the user population density makes a huge difference. In a field environment, for example, a military base, it's not unusual for travel times per ticket, this is the amount of time a technician travels to and from the ticket, to be on the order of an hour or more, sometimes even several hours. So the user population density will impact the workload and hence the headcount requirements. And then where your users are they in a home office? Are they at home? Or are they working in a field or a corporate office? And many other factors will influence the environment and hence the workload and hence the headcount that you need for desktop support. In fact, we have a white paper on how to pick the right number of technicians for desktop support. You can download that from our website. But I wanted to make this point because we get the question all the time, what's the ideal ratio of technicians to end users? There is no ideal ratio. We've seen environments where there's 1 technician for every 25 users, and we've seen environments where there's 1 technician for every 2,000 users. It's the causal factors that define the workload and hence the headcount that you need for desktop support. Okay, back to that big ugly list of metrics. I want to suggest that there has got to be a better way than tracking all 30 of these KPIs. It takes a lot of time. It costs a lot of money. There's a lot of bureaucracy associated with tracking this many KPIs. And so the 80-20 rule for desktop support KPIs, also known as less is more, is summarized here on page 29. There are 8 metrics, or I should say 7 metrics, plus an aggregate metric called the balanced scorecard. We start with what I call the foundation metrics, cost per ticket and customer satisfaction. I call those the foundation metrics because everything you do in service and support, whether it's level 1 support or desktop support, boils down to one of two things. A, you're either trying to contain or reduce your costs, or B, you are trying to drive a higher quality customer experience. Nothing else matters. I understand that's a very draconian statement, but when you boil it down to its essence, what you're trying to do in service and support is contain your costs or even reduce them and drive the highest possible quality customer experience. Again, nothing else matters. Now, viewed through that lens, that greatly simplifies managerial decision making. So I don't care if the decision is about adding headcount, changing locations, insourcing, outsourcing, buying some new technology, taking on a new project. Ask yourself, in the long run, will this decision lead to lower costs, or at least not add to costs, and or will it improve the quality of the customer experience? If the answer to one or both of those questions is not yes, you just don't do it. As simple as that. You don't waste your time on actions that have the effect of increasing your cost and doing nothing for customer satisfaction, or reducing your customer satisfaction and not also reducing your cost per ticket. These are the foundation metrics, and everything you do in IT service and support has got to boil down to cost containment and or an improvement in the quality of the customer experience. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can't directly impact cost and customer satisfaction, but the underlying driver of cost is technician utilization. That's your key driver here. And your underlying drivers of customer satisfaction are two things. First, your first contact resolution rate for incidents. It's analogous to the first contact resolution rate at level 1 for service desk incidents. So FCR, that is, you go out to the side of the user, do you get it resolved on that first contact? That is a big driver of customer satisfaction. So too is your mean time to resolve. We have an MTTR both for service requests and incidents, and I will define those two in a moment and make a distinction between those two. Now, if you've been on previous webcasts or previous presentations that MetricNet has done, you know that the service levels for level 1 service and support don't make much of a difference in customer satisfaction. I'm talking now about average speed of answer, call abandonment rate, and percentage of calls answered, say, in 30 seconds or 50 seconds or 60 seconds. Service levels don't drive customer satisfaction at level 1, but they do drive customer satisfaction at desktop support. So mean time to resolve for incidents, mean time to resolve for service requests is a significant driver of customer satisfaction. So here are your two big drivers of customer satisfaction. Then we've got a metric down here that you may or may not have heard of. It's called percent resolved level 1 capable. Let's say, for example, that a desktop support handles 1,000 tickets a month, and they have some way of determining at the end of the month that 200 of those tickets could have and should have been resolved at level 1. Now, never mind how they got to that 20%. We'll talk about that later. But the point is that the value of this metric would be 20%. That is, they resolved 1,000 tickets in the month. They determined that 20% of those, 200 of those, could have and should have been resolved at level 1. This is an important metric, as you'll soon see, because if you're resolving tickets at desktop support that could have and should have been resolved at level 1, that represents a defect, and those defects are very costly because resolution at desktop support is typically significantly more costly than resolution at level 1. We also look at technician job satisfaction. That's part of the 80-20, the short list of metrics that really matter. And some people are surprised by this. Why would we want to measure technician job satisfaction? It kind of seems like a random metric, but the reality is this. It's a bellwether metric that impacts just about every other metric in service and support. High levels of technician job satisfaction are correlated with high levels of customer satisfaction. High levels of technician job satisfaction are correlated with low levels of absenteeism and turnover, and they are correlated with lower levels of cost per ticket. So what's not to like about that? As you improve technician job satisfaction, all the other metrics also move in the right direction. Moreover, technician job satisfaction can and should be controlled. So when we do a benchmark or an assessment, one of the things I'm always looking for is, does the management of this support organization understand that technician job satisfaction isn't something that just happens? And by the way, low levels of satisfaction, low morale are epidemic in this industry. They're worse at level 1 than they are at desktop support, but they're not very good at either level 1 service desk or desktop support. The good news is you can control these, technician job satisfaction and hence morale. There are things you can do, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation, but that's the good news because technician job satisfaction drives a lot of other positive performance levels within desktop support, and it's helpful to understand how you can control and influence technician job satisfaction for the better. The last metric or aggregate metric on this list is the balanced scorecard. And I promised you that I would show you how a scorecard is created. So I'm going to kind of work backwards on this list and show you how to create the balanced scorecard. Now before I do that, I do want to make a distinction between incidents and service requests. Incidents are typically unplanned work that requires some physical touch to a device. It could be a hardware break fix, a device failure, it might be some connectivity issue. Service requests are typically planned work that requires a physical touch. For example, a move, add, change, a hardware or software upgrade, a device refresh, a device setup. But in combination, you add them up, incidents plus service requests, incident plus service requests equals your ticket volume. Now, not everybody uses this same vernacular. We use this throughout all of the benchmarks we do so that we have a common language and that our clients understand how we define an incident versus a service request. I understand that you may define it differently, but for the purposes of this presentation, this is the definition that I want you to keep in mind. Now for our scorecard, we take 8 metrics, the 8 that we consider to be the most important for desktop support, and we put those over here in the left-hand column. We've got cost per incident, cost per service request, customer satisfaction, technician utilization, first contact resolution rate for incidents, not service requests, percent of incidents resolved in 24 hours, mean time to complete service requests in days, and then we have technician job satisfaction. You'll recognize most of these metrics. They were on our short list back here. The next thing we do is we put a weight on each one of these metrics according to its relative importance. These weights, of course, have to add to 100%. This represents our judgment as to which metrics are more important. You can see that we've overweighted cost per incident and cost per service request, 30% in total there. Customer satisfaction gets 25% of the weight, and so on. Again, this is our judgment. You're certainly welcome to adopt and adapt this scorecard for your own purposes and change these weightings if you believe that some other weighting is appropriate. Then what we show in the third and fourth columns from the left are some typical benchmarking ranges. What's the worst case in a given benchmarking peer group, and what is the best case? So for cost per incident, it can get as high as $312, as low as $19. Cost per service request goes as high as $556, as low as $41, and so on. So we show worst case, best case for a representative peer group. And the peer group ideally should be comparable to your own desktop support organization in scope, scale, complexity, and geography. So we're operating on the premise here that the organization that we created this scorecard for, we have a peer group that is comparable to them along those 4 dimensions that I just mentioned, and here's what those benchmarking ranges look like. We then show the performance. You would put your own performance in this column, third from the right, for each one of these 8 key performance indicators. And you can calculate a metric score using this interpolation formula, which is worst case, subtract your actual performance. That becomes the numerator of your metric score. Divide that by the range, worst case minus best case. And you're going to end up with a number between 0 and 100%. A low number, for example, right here on technician utilization, indicates that you are closer to the worst end of the spectrum than the best end of the spectrum. A high number, as we have here on cost per incident, means that you are much closer to the best end of the range or spectrum than you are to the worst end of the spectrum. Again, this is a simple linear interpolation. It tells you how far along the path you are from the worst case to the best case. If you have a score of 0, it means you have the worst score in the benchmark. If you have a score of 100%, it means that you have the best score in the benchmark. The final step And constructing the scorecard is to multiply the metric score by the metric weighting to come up with a balanced score for each one of the 8 metrics in our scorecard. When you add all these up, you're going to come up with a number between 0 and 100%. If you had the worst performance on every single metric, you'd get a score of 0. If you had the best performance on every single metric, you would end up with a score of 100%. No one in the history of the world has ever done that. In fact, when we run hundreds of desktop support groups through this algorithm, the average score is just 50%, and it's a nice bell-shaped curve. It's a normal distribution, with tails running off to the right above 70% and tails running off to the left below 40%. And if you're typically 62% or above, you're in the top quartile. 50 to 62%, you're usually in the second quartile. 38 to 50%, you're usually in the third quartile, and then below 38% on the balanced scorecard, you're usually in the fourth quartile. Now think about this. What we've done is we've taken a disparate set of metrics with units of dollars, percentages, and days. We've normalized them, and we've aggregated them and rolled them into a single overall measure of performance. Now you look at that and think, okay, 67.1%, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean a whole lot the very first time you do it. But if you do this every month or every quarter, and the number's going up over time, that's a good thing, because it means that overall your performance is improving. By contrast, if you do this every month or every quarter and the number's going down over time, just the opposite is true. It means your performance is deteriorating over time. So what you want to be doing ideally is updating this scorecard monthly or at least quarterly to see what happens. This is real data from a client of ours who did this. The blue bars represent their monthly performance over the course of a year. I think it was 2012. The purple background represents the trailing 12-month average, and you can clearly see here that their performance was on an uptrend. That's a good thing. So think about this. You've got a lot of moving parts going on in your desktop support organization. And if somebody comes to me and says, hey, customer satisfaction was up last month, but so was our cost. Okay, well, are you better off or worse off? I don't know. Somebody comes to me and says, hey, guess what? Our mean time to resolve is down, but our cost is up. Well, are you better off or worse off? The balanced scorecard is a very elegant solution to answering that thorny problem. It allows you to aggregate these metrics, normalize them, and create this single score. And again, it comes alive and it becomes more powerful when you trend this over time. It also allows you to compare to other desktop support organizations. I've shown roughly 100 data points here from, actually it's 143, same 143 that I showed you on that prior slide. This score, 67.1%, is the orange bar. That's what we calculated back here, 67.1%. And we've got another 142 data points that are shown here. They range from a low of 16% over here on the lower right to a high of 86.2% here in the far left. And the average for this group is about 51.9%. That's what this dashed line represents. So what we've done is we've taken 8 metrics, we've rolled them together, we've created a way to track and trend our overall performance, and we've also created a way to compare ourselves to other desktop support groups, i.e. benchmark ourselves. And this is also a great way to communicate to lay people within the organization who may not know the difference between customer satisfaction and technician satisfaction. It's very important to be able to communicate to leadership within the IT organization, whether they be CTOs, directors, managers, CIOs, or others. Chances are if you go to them with a whole bunch of performance charts, individual metrics, it's going to be lost on them. They're going to get lost in the minutia. They're going to be seeing the trees and not the forest. And what you want them to see is the overall perspective, the panoply, if you will, of the overall performance. And the balanced scorecard gives you the power to do that. I'm going to pause and answer a few questions at this point. If I don't get to all of the questions right now, I will, as I mentioned, stay on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation and answer any remaining questions that I did not get to. Okay. Question from Bill. You use the term first-level support, which is common enough. I was wondering if you had any written definitions of what you mean by first-level, second-level, and third-level support. The answer is yes. You're going to see a diagram, Bill, in about 5 or 6 more pages, which do talk about that. But basically, first level in MetricNet's definition is remote support. It is you do it through a chat, you do it through an email, you do it through a live voice call, but you don't actually have direct contact, physical contact with the user or their device. We define second-level support as being desktop. Some people refer to it as desk-side support. This is on-the-spot support, touching the physical device, touching the connectivity device, touching some piece of telecommunications equipment. And third-level support we define, we actually call it N-level support, which is everything in IT beyond desktop support. It might be a NOC, Network Operating Center. It might be a mainframe data center. It could be an applications group, a development or applications maintenance group. Could be a lot of different N-level groups within IT, but third-level support we define as other areas of IT that you can potentially escalate tickets to, whose primary responsibility is not customer support, but who are on that escalation tree as needed so that you can resolve issues that can't be resolved at level 1 or cannot be resolved by desktop support. Okay, from Michelle, on the chart showing where an organization fell comparative to 143 other companies, are the other companies measuring the same metrics? Every one of those 143 companies, Michelle, were measured according to this balanced scorecard. So are they measuring this? They aren't necessarily measuring the same metrics, but because we benchmark them, we measure them all the same way using the balanced scorecard. So, okay, there were only 2 questions queued up. I answered both of them, or I hope I answered both of them. I would encourage you, if there are other questions, please type them in as I continue on through the presentation. And in fact, here's a question from Stacy. How did you determine the best case and worst case cost per incident? We do that, Stacy, when we conduct a benchmark of an organization. We simply look at what's the highest cost per incident, highest cost per service request, lowest customer satisfaction, lowest technician utilization. It's not always the same company. In fact, it's never the same company that has all the worst case performance because they would get 0 on the scorecard. Likewise, it's not the same company that has the best case performance. But essentially, Stacy, the answer to your question is this. When we benchmark an organization, we select a peer group to benchmark them against. That peer group has to be comparable in scope of services offered, volume of tickets handled, or roughly comparable in terms of volume because this is a scale-sensitive function, complexity, and geography. Those things matter. Geography matters because this is a labor-intensive function, and what we don't want to do is compare desktop support in North America to desktop support in the Philippines or desktop support in India or China, for example, because wage rates are the primary driver of cost at both desktop support and level 1 support. So that's probably more of an answer than you needed, but the balance score, the best case and the worst case come from the companies that we benchmark the organization against. So 143 companies, this was the worst and the best case scenario for each of the 8 metrics. There's a question from Dennis. Why the balanced scorecard needs to be updated monthly or quarterly instead of once a year? I believe that updating it once a year leaves you in the dark for much of the year, Dennis, and you could go through an entire year thinking you're doing a good job, and then when you update your scorecard, you find that you've dropped from 67% to 41%, for example. So monthly updates are ideal. If you can't do it monthly, do it quarterly. That doesn't mean you have to change these ranges. In fact, I would encourage you not to change these ranges. You don't have to do a benchmark every time you update your scorecard. But you do need to update your actual performance, this third column from the right, each time you update your scorecard. So annual updates don't give you enough guidance along the way. You're going to be in the dark for much of the year if you're not updating monthly or at least quarterly. Okay, I'll answer one last question, and then we got to get back to our presentation. Any remaining questions will be addressed at the conclusion of the webcast. From Christina, how do you incorporate a measure for a user population that features a high level of executive support recipients? There's not a measure per se, Christina, but when we benchmark that organization, we make sure that we include a peer group that is supporting a similar user population. We understand that executive support has more aggressive service levels. They demand more care and feeding. The mean times to resolve have to be much shorter. The result is that your cost per ticket goes much higher. Now, if that's really justified, when we do a benchmark for an organization like that, we're happy to find a peer group that looks like them and has a similar executive population. But there's a lot of atrocities committed, in my opinion, in this industry in the name of so-called executive support. And when you do that, when you force your service levels down and you provide this hand-holding and this excessive care and feeding for these executives, the cost per ticket goes sky high. I mean, I was recently doing an assessment for an organization here in the Washington, D.C. area where there were a lot of military brass that were, comprised the executive suite, and their service levels were so aggressive, that it was pushing their cost per ticket to almost $500. And in my opinion, that was completely unjustified. I understand that these people's time is important, and I understand that they expect to be, to get prompt service. But $500 a ticket, that was really above and beyond the pale, and the benchmark sort of proved that and demonstrated that. So I want you to look at it two ways. Number one, there are peer groups that also operate in an environment like yours, and when you benchmark, you need to benchmark against peer groups that also have a significant executive support population. However, you need to question the premise. Do you really need to be delivering this level of support to these executives, or is this just something they think they need? Sometimes what's done in the name of executive support drives your cost to an unreasonably high level. So I ask you to question the premise a little bit as to whether or not that executive population really needs the level of support that they think they do. And if you come to the conclusion that they do, they need to at least be aware of how they're driving cost per ticket. They need to at least be aware of what that's costing the organization. Okay, there are other questions. I will get to those at the conclusion of the webcast, as I mentioned. Let me get my pointer back here. Okay, let's get into a case study. I'm going to use a benchmarking case study to talk about the remaining 7 metrics that were on our 80-20 list, on our short list. Let me start by defining what benchmarking is. I think most of you are probably familiar with benchmarking, but benchmarking involves comparing your performance in desktop support to the performance of a benchmarking peer group. Now, the comparison by itself doesn't really mean very much. It's a little bit like measurement without any diagnosis or action planning or action that follows it. The comparison is interesting, but it doesn't do much for you. The more powerful piece of benchmarking is the diagnosis that goes with it. So if some organization has a lower cost per ticket or a higher customer satisfaction or a quicker mean time to resolve, you want to try and understand how they got to that better performance. Because if you understand what they are doing, you can selectively emulate them. You can adopt and adapt what they are doing into your own organization. Ultimately, the goal is to make you more competitive. Now, any organization can improve itself over time. The question is, how long is it going to take you? Is it going to take you months or years? I would submit that benchmarking represents a legitimate shortcut to world-class performance. It allows you to bypass the trial and error incrementalism that typifies most improvement initiatives, and it allows you to build upon the proven best practices of the industry's superior performers. So you end up not improving at an evolutionary pace, but rather at a revolutionary pace by leapfrogging ahead of all the trial and error, all the incremental improvement initiatives that typify most organizations. That's the real power of benchmarking. Now, graphically, if we look at cost per ticket on the x-axis, higher cost on the right, lower cost on the left. Quality is measured by customer satisfaction. What benchmarking enables an organization to do is optimize its performance. In other words, you eliminate the inefficiency from your processes. And when you do that, you have the potential to both reduce your cost and improve your quality. See this lower curve here, the dash curve, is what we call the average performance curve. The solid curve up here is what we call the best-in-class performance curve. And when you benchmark, the goal is to eliminate inefficiency, that is, reduce expenses that are unnecessary, and improve customer satisfaction or quality of service. That's where we want to get you. This is the world-class curve, this upper curve here. Now, in some organizations, they're extremely high cost and extremely high quality. Other organizations are lower cost, lower quality, but they are still optimized. Anyone on this upper curve is going to be a world-class performer. Those way out here have better performance than those way down here, but those way down here have much lower costs than those that are way up here. So this outer curve here represents the optimized curve. And once you're on that curve, it's a strategic decision as to whether or not you want to drive to a higher quality cost point or drive to a lower cost quality point. In some organizations, quality is what drives cost. That is, you're going for high quality, and that will drive high cost. In other organizations, your cost constraints will drive your quality. That is, you're budget constrained. You can only do so much, and so you are relegated to a level on this curve that is a lower quality. but you are doing so at a much lower cost. So being world-class is not about hitting a certain service level or customer satisfaction or cost per ticket. It's about using the limited resources you have in the most efficient way so that you end up on this outer curve, this best-in-class performance curve. Now, since I've brought up this topic of world-class support, I want to define the 4 elements of world-class desktop support. The first has to do with quality. You're exceeding customer expectations, and what that means, if you're in the top quartile on customer satisfaction, is that you're at 93% or above on customer satisfaction. Since mean time to resolve also impacts customer sat, we look for 0.7 workday for incidents, being your MTTR, mean time to resolve, your average time of resolution for incidents. And on service requests, we look for 3.8 days. We look for a metric below that, so that you're below that mean time to resolve on service requests. And again, these are business days. Now, being high quality alone is not enough. You also want to manage your costs at below industry average levels. So we look at cost per ticket, cost per incident, cost per service request to be below average. We also look at whether or not you're taking steps to minimize total cost of ownership. You can do that by reducing the % resolved level 1 capable and by maximizing your level 1 resolution rates. I'm going to define both of those metrics in more detail momentarily. Thirdly, more subjectively, desktop support is following industry best practices. Now, the good news is that the best practices are pretty well defined and documented now. You don't have to go out and reinvent these. They're pretty well understood. In fact, what I'm presenting here today are the best practices around performance measurement and management. Remember, there were 14 of them. We have a similar number of best practices for the other areas: strategy, technology, human resources, ticket handling, and stakeholder communication. So we want to see that the organization is following best practices, and then most subjectively, but very importantly, you're adding value on every transaction. And what that means is that the customer has a positive experience, and that ends up driving a positive view, not just of desktop support or level 1 support, but it drives a positive view of IT overall. When I conclude today's presentation, I'm going to show you some interesting data on this last topic here, driving a positive view of IT overall. So when we talk about world-class desktop support, this is what we're referring to. That brings us to our first polling question of the day, and I've actually got 2 polling questions that I'm going to ask you simultaneously. The first polling question, since we were talking about benchmarking, is, have you benchmarked your desktop support within the past year? 3 answers: yes, you have, no, you haven't, or not applicable. If you're not associated or affiliated with a desktop support organization, if you're a consultant, for example, you might answer not applicable. Okay, we're getting good participation. We're already up to 60%. While you're filling that out, let me just shout out to some of the people that are on the call today. We've got almost every time zone on the globe represented. We got people dialing in from Singapore, Australia, Japan, Turkey, most of the countries in Europe, as well as the United States, and all the way out to Hawaii. So we've got almost every time zone represented. I want to say hello to Donna Mineo. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you for joining us. And I'm calling these names out at random. Kyle Brown, thanks for joining us. Shannon Scove, great to see you here. Let's see. Travis Horn, I saw you last week. Great to have you here on the webcast. Zuzana Hadas, great to have you here. If you haven't answered this question, please weigh in on our poll. Have you benchmarked your desktop support within the past year? Okay, we've got almost 90% participation in that poll, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and then share the results with you. Okay, 21% of you have benchmarked desktop support within the past year. 64% of you have not benchmarked desktop support within the last year, and then 15% not applicable. This is a fairly common result. It's usually about 25% yes, 65 or 60% or so no, with 15% not applicable. So that's a fairly typical result that we would get. I want to ask the follow-on question or the follow-on poll, which is this: do you plan to benchmark your desktop support in the future? And there's 5 possible answers here. Yes, you're planning to benchmark within the next 90 days. Yes, you're planning to benchmark within the next 6 months. Yes, within the next year. No plans to benchmark at this time, or not applicable. Okay, we've got more than 50% weighing in on this poll. Please vote if you haven't voted. I'm interested in seeing the results. We're up to about 70% right now. Let's see if we can push that above 80%, and then I'll close the poll down and we'll move on in our case study. Okay, got a pretty good participation rate on that. Let me share the results with you. Okay, pretty evenly divided. 22% planning to benchmark within the next 90 days. Okay, kudos to you. Another 24% planning to benchmark within the next 6 months, and then 19% within the next year. Now 14%, no plans to benchmark at this time. Recall on the previous poll, have you benchmarked within the last year? I think the number was about 15%. So I'm hoping that that 15% is the same 14% that at least currently has no plan to benchmark at this time. Now, for those of you who are planning to benchmark, let's see, 22 and 24 is 46, plus 19 is going to be 65%. So almost 2/3 of you are planning to benchmark your desktop support within the next year. I want to encourage you to follow through on those plans, because I think what you'll find is that benchmarking is one of the most cost-effective activities that you can engage in. It doesn't take a lot of time, it doesn't cost a lot of money, but it has an enormously positive influence on the organization, and it really does allow you to take that shortcut to bypass all the incremental trial and error, blood, sweat, and tears associated with incremental improvement, and improve your desktop support performance not at an evolutionary pace, but at a revolutionary pace. So for those of you who are considering benchmarking here, the 2/3 of you that answered that you're planning to benchmark desktop support within the next year, I want to encourage you to move forward with those plans. I think that you'll find that it's one of the most rewarding exercises you can engage in. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and we're going to move on now in our best practices discussion. And what I'm showing on this particular page here is, make sure, okay, this is some real benchmarking data from a desktop support benchmark that MetricNet completed not too long ago. Now over on the left, you see the 7 categories of metrics: cost, quality, productivity, service level, technician metrics, ticket handling metrics, and workload metrics. Then we've got the 30 key performance indicators listed in the second column from the left. Then we've got the performance of the organization that did this benchmark, and then for the peer group, 143, we show the average, the minimum performance, and the maximum. These are the statistics from the benchmarking peer group. It doesn't show the complete distribution of data, it just shows the statistics. Now, there's a lot of data on this page. I want to caution you about comparing your own desktop support to this page, because remember what I mentioned earlier, every organization is unique, and you need to select a peer group when you're benchmarking that is similar to you in scope and scale and complexity and geography. If your travel time per ticket is 10 minutes, and you're comparing yourself against organizations, for example, in this benchmark, where the travel times per ticket are significantly different, you're not going to get a fair comparison. So you really need to get that comparability in scope, scale, complexity, and geography. Although this is real data, it is for illustrative purposes. It's not meant to substitute as a benchmark for your organization. Now what I'm going to do is blow up 2 of the metrics. I'm going to magnify 2 of the metrics so we can really take a look at those. So cost per ticket, 81 versus 68. Customer satisfaction, 71% versus 81%. That's what I'm showing on this page. So here's cost per ticket, $81 for the company that we did this benchmark for. The peer group average was at $68. Customer satisfaction, 71% versus 81%. Please note, these are the 2 foundation metrics, the 2 most important metrics, and they're failing on both of them. Their cost per ticket is high, and their customer satisfaction is low. We need to figure out why. And as we go through the 7 KPIs that were on the short list, we're going to determine why their costs are high and why their customer satisfaction is low. So let's start with the 2 foundation metrics of cost per ticket and customer satisfaction. Think of a 2-dimensional chart. The x-axis here is cost per ticket, which is your efficiency dimension. Your y-axis is your effectiveness or customer satisfaction, your effectiveness dimension. Now we've organized this into 4 quadrants. Upper right quadrant is where you are both low cost and high quality. So you're both efficient and effective in this upper right-hand quadrant. This is the holy grail of any service and support organization. Whether you're desktop support or service desk, you always want to try and be in this upper right-hand quadrant, where your costs are below average and your customer satisfaction is above average. The average customer satisfaction for this peer group is shown by this horizontal line that goes across here. The average cost per ticket is shown by this vertical line that goes through the middle here. Now those that end up in the upper left quadrant are high cost, but they're also high quality. Those in the lower quadrant, lower right that is, are low cost, but they're also low quality, and they need to move up, improve their quality over time, just like those in the upper left quadrant need to reduce their costs over time to get into the upper right-hand quadrant. Those in the lower left have the worst of everything. They have high costs and low quality, and they need to be taking steps on both dimensions to improve their quality and reduce their costs. That's the situation we're in here. High cost, low customer satisfaction. That organization is down in this lower left-hand quadrant. Now, if you're optimized, this is really similar to the curve that I showed you a few minutes ago on that benchmarking page. We've just reversed the x-axis. If you're optimized, you're going to be out here on this outer arc. In some cases, you can be optimized at an extremely low cost and a customer satisfaction that is above average. In other cases, you might be optimized at an extremely high customer satisfaction, but a cost that is slightly below the peer group average. But if you're out on this curve here, that is where you are optimized, and ultimately that's where you want to try and get. That is where you're deploying your resources, your limited resources, your dollars, your technology, your headcount, your office space, and everything else. You're deploying those in the most efficient way that you possibly can. When you've done that efficiently, you will be optimized. Then, as I mentioned, you can make a strategic choice. Do you want to be higher quality, in which case you have to spend more money? Or do you want to be lower cost, in which case you will sacrifice some quality? That's the very definition of optimization. You can't reduce costs anymore without sacrificing quality, and you cannot improve quality without adding additional cost. That is the definition of optimization. In a two-dimensional optimization means that you cannot move one variable without moving the other one, without impacting the other one. If you're not on this optimized curve, you got a free lunch going for you, meaning that you can cut your costs and improve the quality of service simultaneously. So let's drill down on this and take a look at what drives cost per ticket, which is your technician utilization. Not surprisingly, this is a labor-intensive function, just like level 1 service desk is a labor-intensive function. So looking at technician utilization versus cost per ticket, the x-axis here, page 47, is technician utilization. As that number goes up, cost per ticket goes down. Not surprising. Again, it's a labor-intensive function, so as you become more efficient in your labor usage, you would expect your cost per ticket to go down. Now, the slope here is about 1 to 2, meaning that it takes a 2 percentage point increase in technician utilization to produce a 1 percentage point decrease in cost per ticket. The reason is that half of your costs in desktop support are made up of technicians. That is, your technician salaries and benefits are about half the total cost. Now, if you look at indirect personnel as well, like your workforce schedulers, your team leads, your supervisors, your QA/QC people, your trainers, and so on, human resources, both technicians and non-technicians, make up about 70% of your total cost. But technicians alone, typically on average in a desktop support group, make up about half your total cost. That is their salaries plus their benefits. So it takes a 2% improvement in utilization, increase in utilization, to yield a 1 percentage point decrease in cost per ticket. How do we define utilization? That's a little bit complicated, but not really. We look at the number of incidents that the average tech handles in a month. We multiply that by work time per incident. Well, we'll talk later about how you get that metric, work time per incident. We add to that the number of service requests handled by a technician in a month, multiplied by average service request work time. And we add to that the average number of tickets handled by a technician a month multiplied by average travel time per ticket. So what we've got in the numerator is the workload. We've got incident workload, service request workload, and then we've got travel time. And we divide that by the number of working minutes in a month, which is about 9,800 in case you've ever wondered. There's an example here on the next page. That calculates out to about 70% technician utilization. The average in this industry is about 60% technician utilization. We have seen some organizations that go as high as 70 or even 80%, but 60% is about the average for the industry. Keep in mind that we don't back out things like sick days, holidays, training time, project time, or idle time. We measure every desktop support organization worldwide in exactly the same way because everyone has different policies, for example, on days off, sick days, project time, idle time, training time, administrative time, and the like. So we don't make allowance for any of that. We look at everyone worldwide in exactly the same way, and the utilization ends up being about 60%. In this particular example, it's 70%. But that is how you calculate technician utilization. We'll talk a little bit later about how you get your hands on things like incident work time, service request work time, and travel time per ticket. So let's move on. We've now determined and ascertained and proven that utilization is a big driver of cost per ticket. What about customer satisfaction? Customer sat has 3 big drivers: technician job satisfaction, first contact resolution rate for incidents, and your mean times to resolve, your service levels for both incidents and service requests. How do we know? Well, look at the data. Blue diamonds are data points, red line is linear regression. As technician satisfaction improves, so too does customer satisfaction. If we look at first contact resolution rate for incidents, meaning the technician shows up and they resolve the problem on the first visit to the user or the device, as that number improves, so too does customer satisfaction. Blue diamonds data points, red line linear regression. If we look at the mean time to resolve for incidents in days on the x-axis here, number of work days required to resolve on average an incident, you can see that as the MTTR increases, customer satisfaction goes down. No surprise there. Users want their stuff fixed quickly. So as the MTTR increases, customer satisfaction goes down. Now let's look at training hours. You know, training has become kind of the motherhood and apple pie of service and support. And if everybody that talked the talk on training, yes, we do it, we like it, it's important, blah, blah, blah. If everybody who talked the talk also walked the walk, meaning actually did what they said they were going to do, the number of training hours for both level 1 service desk as well as desktop support would be about 5x what they are right now. Almost nobody fulfills their promise, if you will, what they claim they're going to do in training. Almost no organization actually does what they claim they're going to do in training. But it's important to recognize that training has a huge impact on your service levels, on your first contact resolution rate, and it also has a huge impact on technician job satisfaction. I alluded earlier to the fact that you can control technician job satisfaction. Training is one of the big levers you have to drive satisfaction higher. Having a career path has a big influence on technician job satisfaction, and the quantity and quality of coaching that your technicians get has a lot to do as well with their technician job satisfaction. So training turns out not to just be motherhood and apple pie. It has a real impact on technician job satisfaction, your first contact resolution rate for incidents, and your service levels, and by proxy, it impacts customer satisfaction. That's the whole point of displaying the data in this way. How do we know? New technician training hours on the x-axis, technician job satisfaction on the y-axis. Blue diamonds are data points, red line is a linear regression. What about annually? How much refresher training do your technicians get? X-axis shows the annual training hours. Y-axis shows technician job satisfaction. The blue diamonds on the y-axis are those organizations that provide no additional training on an annual basis for their technicians. And in fact, the case study that we're working on right now, as you'll soon see, they don't provide any ongoing training for their technicians. But training truly does drive technician job satisfaction. Also, the technician time on job, that is the experience level. This represents months on the x-axis here, months on the job. As that number increases, you would expect incident FCR to go up. So this is a good thing. If you can keep turnover down, your technician time on job will increase. That will have the effect of increasing your incident FCR, and we also know that that has the effect of improving your customer satisfaction. I hope you're starting to get the sense here that these KPIs are interconnected and interrelated. There's a linkage, and when one metric moves, several other metrics are likely to move with it. You have control over these metrics, and that's one of the most empowering things to know and understand in IT service and support. I introduced a metric earlier called % resolved level 1 capable. That impacts your total cost of ownership, and there's a closely related metric called first level resolution rate. Let me define both of them here. % resolved level 1 capable, I gave you an example earlier. It's a percentage of tickets resolved by desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1. Believe it or not, the industry average is about 25%. It's a pretty high number. Those organizations that actively try and minimize tickets resolved at desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1 are able to get their metric down to about 4 or 5%. I've never seen anybody eliminate them in their entirety. But these represent defects, and they need to be eliminated because they are costly, as you will soon see. First level resolution rate is a closely related metric. It looks at the number of tickets resolved at level 1 divided by all tickets that can potentially be resolved at level 1. Now, some people assume that 1 minus the FLR results in the % resolved level 1 capable, but that's not true because the denominators on these ratios are different. The number of tickets handled at desktop support is different than the number of tickets handled at first level resolution rate. Let's say, for example, that first level handles 2,000 tickets a month, and 400 of those that could have been and should have been resolved at level 1 get escalated to desktop support. Okay, their first level resolution rate is going to be 80% because they escalated 20% to desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1. So they have an 80% FLR. But let's say desktop support handles 1,000 tickets a month, and 400 of those, which came from level 1, could and should have been resolved at level 1. The percent resolved level 1 capable in that case will be 40%, which, by the way, is not unheard of. I've seen numbers as high as 50 or even 60%. Sometimes it happens when level 1 is not well trained. Sometimes it happens when they don't have good tools. Sometimes it happens when they're understaffed. They just push tickets out to desktop support because they don't have the human resources to be able to handle the workload. So 1 minus the FLR does not equal the percent resolved level 1 capable. The reason? There are different denominators, that is different numbers of tickets handled at first level and at desktop support. But here's the real point of this train of thought, is to show you that last year in North America, the average cost of resolving a ticket at level 1 was about $22. This is a fully loaded cost. When you look at all the salaries and benefits, you look at the office space, that is the facility's expense, you look at the travel, the training, the technology, the telecommunications, add it all up, divided by all the tickets at level 1, you come up with about $22. And that's all channels. That's chat, that's voice, that's email, that's everything. Now, when a ticket goes to desktop support, the average cost of resolution is $62 on top of that $22. This is not an all-inclusive cost. This is going to be $62 on top of $22 if the ticket originated at the service desk. You can see that when we go to level 3, and this was to the question that was asked at the Q&A break, we consider level 3 anything above level 2 within IT. Cost of resolution on average, fully loaded cost is $85 in addition to the $62 that may have already been incurred, and in addition to the $22 that may have already been incurred here. Field support on average $200 a ticket, vendor support almost $500 per ticket. So you've heard the expression in this industry, get it done at level 1. That's not just a catchphrase. There's real value there, because if you can resolve a ticket at level 1 versus desktop support, you're going to be saving yourself on average $62 for every ticket you resolve at level 1 that might otherwise have been pushed out to desktop support. Now, some refer to this concept as shift left. You've probably heard that term. If I take this chart and I rotate it 90 degrees to the right, 90 degrees clockwise, you can see what shift left means. Shift a level 2 ticket to the left and resolve it at level 1. Or shift a level 1 ticket to the left and resolve it at level 0, meaning self-help. Or take a level 2 ticket and resolve it at level 0. So that's, in my diagram, it's shift down. In other diagrams, it would be shift left if we rotate this diagram 90 degrees to the right. Now, in order to make this process work, that is to minimize your total cost of ownership on resolution in service and support, you need to have a SPOC, a single point of contact support organization. On this chart, I've shown the user community out here on the left. There's the service desk. That's the intake portal, if you will, for service and support. We've got desktop support. We call it level 2 at MetricNet. Other levels within IT or N-level support we call level 3. It might be an applications group, a NOC, a data center. You've got field support, which means you get in a vehicle and you go somewhere to resolve the problem. And you've got vendor support. Now, what are the key SPOC principles? Well, first of all, you need to take an end-to-end view of support. If you're treating level 1 support and desktop support as separate entities, as siloed, you're not going to gain the benefit of reducing your total cost of ownership. You need to view service and support as an end-to-end process. You need to have a single point of contact for all IT-related incidents, questions, problems, and work requests. The level 1 service desk is the SPOC, okay? This is not a turf issue. This is not a MetricNet saying that the service desk is superior to desktop support or anything like that. It simply makes common sense. When you're defining a SPOC support organization, someone has to be the SPOC, and that SPOC is the service desk. Now, it doesn't mean that they resolve every issue, but they are responsible for ticket triage, resolution at level 1 when possible, effective handoffs to other levels of support, desktop support, third level IT, and so on. They're responsible for resolution, coordination, and facilitation. Now, ticket closure, this doesn't mean that they have to close tickets, but they do have responsibility for making sure that tickets are closed effectively. And they oftentimes serve the role of what's called ticket chasing. Some of you even have people at work in your service and support organization called ticket chasers, and what that means is that you're looking at the open ticket profile and making sure that they don't fall out of service level compliance. And if you've got a ticket sitting out there with an applications group or with a field support group or with a desktop support group and it's an hour away from expiring, that is blowing through a service level, you call them up, you rattle somebody's cage, you read them the riot act, basically, and say, look, we're about to fall out of compliance. Do something about this. Now, in this environment, the SPOC environment, single point of contact environment, desktop drive-bys, fly-bys, snags, you may have heard that vernacular, you may have heard that slang before. These are discouraged. Let me explain what these are. You've got an end user sitting in their cube and they see a desktop support tech. It might be a friend, it might be somebody that they just see roaming around periodically. They grab the person and they say, hey, can you help me do something here? I've been trying to convert rows to columns in Excel, or I've been trying to archive these old Outlook items, or I've been trying to, whatever it is that they're trying to do, that has to be eliminated and discouraged. We call it bypass. That is, you're bypassing the SPOC organization, and instead of going to the entry point of the SPOC organization, you're grabbing this person directly. You're snagging them. It's a flyby. It's a drive-by. And the reason these are to be discouraged is because you may be turning a $22 ticket into a $62 ticket. That is why it's to be discouraged. Now, if your organization is used to doing this kind of thing, it takes a while to wean your end users off of this, and you will see some reduction in customer satisfaction. If you go to a strict SPOC model and your end users have been grabbing the desktop technicians and using them whenever they want to, and you have not been following a SPOC model, you will experience a temporary reduction in customer satisfaction. But for the greater good of the organization, it's the right thing to do because it reduces your costs, and your customer satisfaction will recover. It might take 3 months, might take 4 months, but it will recover. In order to make SPOC work, you got to be pretty strict about this whole process. And the entry point for service and support is the level 1 service desk. And again, they don't resolve everything, but they are responsible for ticket triage, coordination, effective handoffs, and the like. Now, here's the data that proves that single point of contact does reduce the total cost of ownership. We've got 2 sets of data here. The blue diamonds are organizations that do follow a SPOC model, and you can see that their average percent resolved level 1 capable, that is percentage of tickets resolved by desktop that could and should have been resolved at level 1, it's about 15.3%. For those organizations not following a single point of contact model, that's the fuchsia colored squares, you can see that the percent resolved level 1 capable is about 23%. That's about 7.5 percentage points of difference. You might not think that's a lot, but what if you're handling 1,000 contacts per month at desktop support? 7.5 percentage points is 75 tickets. Multiply 75 tickets by this incremental $62. That's over $4,000 a month over the course of a year. That's about $50,000. That is significant. And that's for a 1,000 ticket a month desktop support organization. What if you're handling 5,000 or 10,000 tickets or more per month? SPOC has real value for an organization. It helps reduce and minimize the percent of tickets resolved by desktop support that could and should have been resolved at level 1. That brings us to our final polling question of the day, and this polling question, as you might imagine, has to do with SPOC, single point of contact. And here's the polling question. Do you run a SPOC, single point of contact support organization? Since we've been talking about that for the last 5 minutes or so, do you run a SPOC, single point of contact support organization? Okay. Good to see that we're getting vigorous participation here. We're up over 60% already. I'll give you another 5 seconds or so to weigh in on this. Please let us know if you run a SPOC, single point of contact service and support organization. Okay, please weigh in if you haven't done so already. Okay, let me close that poll and share the results with you. Okay, more than 2/3 are running a SPOC support organization. 18% no, 14% not applicable. You know, when I first started doing these webinars about 7 years ago, these results were roughly reversed. The vast majority of those who participated in our webcast, whether it was a desktop support webcast or a service desk webcast, were not following a SPOC, single point of contact support model. So the fact that we've got, it's actually more than 2/3 when we take out the 14% not applicable. It's more like 3/4 or almost 80% that are of those that responded yes or no are following a single point of contact support model. So kudos, it looks like the industry is moving in the right direction. So I'm going to close that poll down, and we're going to move on. And what I want to show you here is the KPIs that we've been going through. Let me get my pointer back. Okay, here we go. This is what we've just been through. We've been through a build that started with the foundation metrics. And by the way, the metrics in red are the ones that really matter. They were on the short list of the KPIs that really matter. We started with our, let me back it up. We started with our foundation metrics. We showed you what drove the foundation metrics, and we drilled all the way down to those key drivers of technician job satisfaction. Understanding this linkage, this cause and effect relationship, is enormously powerful because it gives you the ability to pull levers you need to pull in order to achieve desired outcomes. If you're trying to reduce your cost per ticket, look first at technician utilization, look secondly at your service levels. Are the service levels too aggressive? If they are, that can drive you to a low utilization number, which results in high cost per ticket. If your customer satisfaction is not good, look at your first contact resolution rate on incidents. Is it lower than it should be? Are your service levels longer? Mean times to resolve longer than they should be? Is your technician job satisfaction suffering because the coaching, career pathing, and training hours are inadequate? Understanding this is enormously powerful. This cause-effect relationship, how the KPIs impact each other, this linkage, if you will, the KPI linkage, is enormously powerful. So we're back to our case study. Remember, we had low customer satisfaction and we had high cost per contact. So we're going to diagnose customer satisfaction first. What is the big driver of customer satisfaction? Incident first contact resolution rate. So let's look at that. This company had an incident FCR of 49%. The peer group was at 55%. Okay, there's our first smoking gun. So we got a big issue on customer sat. Our smoking gun, the first one, says the incident FCR is low. Why might that be? If incident FCR is low, could it be a training hour issue? Turns out that it is. Remember I mentioned annual technician training hours, 0 for this company versus 21 hours for the peer group. New technician training hours, 10 hours of new technician training versus 46 hours for the peer group. Now, in level 1 support, these numbers are much, much higher. Typically, you see 150, 200, sometimes even 240, 250 hours of initial technician training hours. Annually, however, the numbers do tend to be closer to 10, 20, maybe 30 hours per year. But technicians at desktop support, because they generally come in with prior experience doing this kind of work, they tend not to receive as much training. But 40 to 50 hours is pretty common. This organization was providing very little new technician training hours. They did not even have a performance target for incident FCR. So the diagnosis here was pretty straightforward. Number 1, get a performance target because you don't even have one. Number 2, invest in training. Provide more new technician training as well as annual technician training. Within 180 days, they had upped this number to 50 hours of initial training, 28 hours annually, and within 6 months, they had their incident FCR up to almost 60%, and their customer satisfaction was just under 85%. Pretty straightforward diagnosis, pretty straightforward prescription. The action they took, add training hours, establish a target, pretty simple stuff, but it worked. It worked because they understood how these KPIs were linked together. They understood the cause and effect relationships, and they took action that enabled them to improve their customer satisfaction. Okay, what about cost? Their cost per ticket is $81. The peer group is at $68. Okay, what's the big driver of cost? Well, technician utilization. So let's look at that metric. They're at 46%, which is below the peer group average of 54%. Now, the reason I looked at service levels is because I wanted to understand if their service levels were possibly too aggressive. Well, it turns out that wasn't the case. They're resolving 33% of tickets within 24 hours. The peer group is resolving 51% of tickets within 24 hours. The diagnosis here was very straightforward, but also somewhat sad. They were just overstaffed. Okay, we sometimes find that when we do these benchmarks. And the reason I put the turnover figure here is because when you're overstaffed, you got to do something about it. Well, not always, but one approach is do nothing. That is, so you don't change your headcount or anything else, and you continue to have high cost. The second approach is you lay people off. That is, you reduce your headcount, improve your utilization, and reduce your cost per contact. The third solution is you move people into other positions within the organization. That also reduces headcount, improves utilization, and reduces cost. And the fourth alternative, which is why I put the turnover here, is that you attrit, meaning that as people leave the organization, you don't backfill. Now, their turnover was pretty high. And by the way, high turnover is epidemic in this industry. It's even worse at level 1 than it is at desktop support. But in this particular case, the turnover worked to their advantage because they were able to attrit and get down to a reasonable headcount fairly quickly. That improved their utilization to almost 60%, and their cost per ticket dropped to into the high 50s. That only took them about 3 months because their turnover was so high. So again, the diagnosis here was real straightforward. The action plan was pretty straightforward. And within 90 days, they had rectified their high cost per ticket. Within 180 days, they had rectified their low customer satisfaction. That's the power of benchmarking, is that it enables you not just to compare your performance to others, but to diagnose what drives the negative performance gaps and to act on those. So understanding this cause and effect diagram is one of the key takeaways from today's webcast. Now, we started by talking about KPIs as an observational tool, something that was very passive that didn't actually impact the organization. And we moved to the holistic application of KPIs, where KPIs were much more active in terms of their ability to drive performance improvement in the organization by not just using them to track and trend performance, but to diagnose performance improvement opportunities, develop prescriptions to improve performance, and then to ultimately act on those KPIs and improve performance over time. What I want to do now is put all this in strategic context for you. I'm going to start with something called the paradox of IT service and support. Now, less than 5% of IT dollars worldwide are spent on the service desk and desktop support. In fact, the number is only 4%. Now, what's the remaining 96% spent on? Well, things like application development, application maintenance, network operations, mainframe, mid-range computing, desktop computing, services that are contracted out, for example, disaster recovery. Now, when you're spending only 4% of a budget on service and support, a lot of people make the erroneous assumption that there can't possibly be much upside here, and so they tend to view it as a cost center, meaning that it's a cost, it's a necessary evil. We're just going to try and manage the costs as best we can. We're going to try and squeeze them. We're going to try and cut costs as much as we can. And so many service and support organizations are managed with the goal of minimizing costs. But the most effective support organizations have strategies that focus on maximizing value. Now, you can create value in service and support in at least 3 ways. One of them we've already looked at, minimizing total cost of ownership. That is, get it done at level 1 or even push it to level 0 if you possibly can. Get it done as low on this diagram as you possibly can. Shift left is what this concept is sometimes called. Secondly, and this chart is a little bit complicated. Let me see if I can explain it here for you. MetricNet did a study a couple of years ago that 60 companies participated in. Both their service desk and their desktop support organizations participated in this study. And for a period of 1 month, each of those 60 companies selected randomly users within the organization and gave them stopwatches and asked them to keep track of their downtime due to IT-related problems, incidents, service requests, and the like. So, for example, the network's down and I lose 4 hours of productivity. Okay, I record that 4 hours that day when the network was down. Now, here was the interesting conclusion from this research, is that we benchmarked each of these 60 organizations. We benchmarked both their service desk and their desktop support. We looked at these 3 metrics, customer sat, FCR, mean time to resolve. And based upon how they scored, we had a balanced scorecard for each of them in both service desk and desktop support. Based on how they scored, we bucketed them into quartiles. The best performing 15 ended up in the top quartile. The next group of 15 ended up in the second quartile. Third group of 15 ended up in the third quartile. And those that performed the worst, the bottom 15, were in the fourth quartile. That's what this data is here. These are the quartiles, quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3, quartile 4. There are 15 blue diamonds in each of these stacks right here. And when we run the regression through this, looking at productive hours lost per employee versus the performance level of service and support, if you're unlucky enough to be in a fourth quartile performing service and support organization, you're losing about 47 productive hours per year. Now, your average end user has, as I mentioned earlier, almost 3 devices now. They have a laptop computer, a desktop computer, a smartphone, a tablet. They might even have a server and a printer in their office. And when those devices don't work correctly, there is oftentimes a workaround, but that workaround sometimes involves extra time. It reduces productivity. And sometimes, if you've got a field salesperson and their hard drive fails, as an example, they may be out of work for 12 hours, 15 hours, or longer. So if you are unlucky enough to work for a company whose service and support ended up in the fourth quartile, on average, as a knowledge worker, you're losing about 47 productive hours per year. By contrast, if you are lucky enough to work in one of these organizations that has a top quartile performing IT service and support organization, you lose, on average, 17 productive hours per year. Now look at the difference between first and fourth quartile, 17 hours versus 47 hours. That's a 30-hour difference, which means that if you are a top quartile service and support organization, you are returning an extra 30 productive hours to your end users every year versus those who are in the fourth quartile. Think about that. Multiply those 30 hours across hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of employees, and you start to see real performance improvements in terms of returned productivity to end users. This is the biggest single economic contribution made by service and support, is that you make end users more productive. MetricNet is the first company that has actually quantified this, and now in every benchmark we do, we actually calculate the ROI, the return on investment, based upon how an organization minimizes their total cost of ownership and based upon how they return productive hours to end users. There's enormous leverage here that is oftentimes overlooked because, after all, this is a 4% function. What is the upside? The upside is your ability to minimize TCO, the ability to return productive hours to end users, and as I pointed out in my second presentation at the HDI conference last week, this one on the KPIs for the ROI of service and support, the ROI for top quartile service and support organizations, the return on investment, that is the economic value you contribute to the enterprise divided by what you spend operationally on an annual basis, is oftentimes as high as 200 or even 300%. By contrast, those in the fourth quartile typically have negative returns on investment. The third key source of leverage is this one. This is data from a survey that MetricNet conducted a few years ago. There were more than 1,000 corporations that participated in this. They were all large companies. You would recognize their names. And we asked, essentially what happened was we found companies that were doing surveys of their end users to find out what they thought of IT. And we asked them if we could piggyback a question onto their survey, and that question specifically asked what drove that end user's opinion of IT. Now, it was a multiple choice question, which is why, and we allowed them to pick up to 3 answers, which is why when you add these up, it's more than 100%. But the stunning conclusion is this: 84% of end users said that the service desk has a significant influence on their opinion of IT, and 47% said that desktop support has a significant influence on their opinion of corporate IT. Think about that. Service desk and desktop support are the primary drivers of customer satisfaction, not just with support, but with all of IT. This is high leverage stuff. We're talking about a 4% function that has the ability to reduce total cost of ownership, that has the ability to make end users way more productive throughout the organization and produce an ROI well in excess of 200%, and has the ability to drive customer opinion, not just for service and support, but for all of IT. And if I'm a CIO or a CTO or some manager within information technology, I'm going to act on this. And what it means is that I'm going to provide whatever resources the service desk and desktop support need in order to ensure that customers have a good experience here. You see, customers don't hang out in the NOC or the data center. They tend not to hang out with the application developers, but they do have frequent interactions with desktop support and service desk. So it naturally follows that their opinions of service and support translate into their opinions of all of IT. But as a CIO or a manager or a leader in IT, I'm going to invest not just headcount, dollars, technology, office space in service and support. I'm going to spend my personal time and attention. If not in person, I'm going to be on the phone with them every week, and I'm going to commit to spending an hour or 2 with service and support every week, because as the expression in this industry is, as service and support goes, so too goes all of IT. And that's what's summarized on this particular page here. If end users have good thoughts and a high opinion of desktop support and service desk, that translates into a positive opinion, positive impression of all of IT, and by proxy, that translates into a positive opinion of the CIO, the CTO, and all of IT leadership. So this represents a high leverage opportunity for leadership in IT to make all of IT good, to make themselves look good, and by proxy, to be blunt, this is job security. So this might be a 4% function for many organizations, but make no mistake about it. There's huge leverage here in your ability to reduce total cost of ownership, in your ability to return productive hours to end users, and in your ability to make all of IT look good. So for those of you who work in service and support, you are the gateway to IT for the vast majority of end users. And what you do has repercussions throughout the organization and has far-reaching implications throughout the organization for others, not just end users, but for the leadership of IT. So the 80-20 rule for desktop support KPIs includes the short list of 7 metrics plus the balanced scorecard. So when it comes to desktop support KPIs, less really is more. All you need are the 7 KPIs plus the balanced scorecard, but it's critical to understand the cause and effect relationship among these KPIs. This gives you the power to achieve desired outcomes in desktop support. Not all KPIs are controllable. Remember, we had those causal factors, things like the mix of devices, the travel time per user or per ticket. We have the mix of laptops and desktops, where the end users are located, the user population density, and a whole bunch of other factors. You can't control those. That's your environment. You have to work on the things that you can control. Now, the effective application of desktop KPIs can help you drive high levels of customer satisfaction. That's what we just saw right here for all of IT. It can help you reduce and minimize TCO for end user support, and it can help you return productive hours to end users. So in a minute, I'm going to get to the questions that are queued up and that have been typed into the dialog box and conduct a Q&A session. But before I do the Q&A, I'd like to make a few closing remarks. There are a number of things that you can do almost immediately to leverage some of the insights that you may have gained here today. First, I want to encourage all of you to take a look around our new website at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we offer a free membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our content. I'd also suggest that you connect with us on social media, where we put out a steady stream of information that IT service and support professionals might find useful. In the copy of the presentation itself, we've provided links to all of our social media pages and groups. Don't forget to register for our upcoming webcasts. I've shown them here through October, but we've actually got them scheduled through the end of the year. These are always free of charge, of course. Please feel free to browse through our resource library on MetricNet's website, where you'll find a number of white papers, presentations, magazine articles on desktop support, benchmarking, and industry best practices. In fact, we just posted our most recent white paper entitled Service and Support as a Business. That white paper is now available for download on our website. For those who are interested in benchmarking, there are at least 3 ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, there are what we call our peer group benchmarks that compare your desktop support, service desk, or call center to a unique peer group of comparable desktop support organizations. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. If you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop button in the upper navigation bar, and you'll see our industry benchmarks that are available for download. Finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. You can reach MetricNet at this phone number in the United States, 703-992-7559. You can always fill out a form to reach us on our website at MetricNet.com, or you can email us at info@MetricNet.com. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I'll be answering any questions that you typed in during the webcast. And for those who must exit the webcast at this time, I want to thank you for attending the session. I hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. Thank you once again. Let me open up the question box here, and I will answer the questions that are queued up. Okay, from Christina, how do you incorporate a measure for a user? Oh, I already answered that. It had to do with the executives. Let's see. From Denise, or Dennis, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. It's D-E-N-I-S, so I don't know if that's Dennis or Denise. Can you use a similar card to measure agent performance this balanced scorecard, is it only for management? Yes, absolutely. The mechanics of the scorecard can be used to measure agent performance as well. The metrics will be a little bit different, but you can put a productivity metric in there, such as the number of tickets handled per month. You can put a quality metric in there, such as customer satisfaction, assuming that you can track customer sat back to an individual technician. You probably want to put a service level metric in there, and then you want some soft metrics, things like teamwork, mentoring, and initiative. Now, even those are soft metrics, you can still put them on a quantitative scale, 1 to 5, much like the scale that I presented very early on in this presentation around metrics maturity. So if someone exhibits a lot of teamwork, they would get a 5. If someone doesn't take much initiative, they might get a 1 or a 2 on initiative. If someone's sort of in between in terms of mentoring, you would give them a 3 or a 4 possibly. So even subjective factors, which I would encourage you to include in your technician balance scorecard, even subjective factors you can quantify. Now the value of a scorecard for individual agents, and it would be applied to an individual agent, is that it objectifies the process of delivering feedback to those individual agents or technicians. So there's no ambiguity, no misunderstanding about what is expected of them, and on a monthly or quarterly basis, however often you sit down with that technician and go through their scorecard with them, they understand exactly why they got the score that they got, and the balanced scorecard can also help them identify where they need to focus their time and attention to improve their performance. So to your question, absolutely, the scorecard that I presented mechanically is identical to a technician scorecard. You might change the metrics a little bit, but that technician scorecard is an ideal way to objectify the process of delivering feedback to your technicians. Some of our clients even go a step further, and they will actually post the results of the technician scorecards on a monthly basis. Now, they do not identify each technician by name. It will be identified by technician 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera, because they're not trying to embarrass anybody. But it is helpful for a technician to understand where they fall in the lineup. Are they in the top quartile? Are they in the bottom quartile? Those that aren't performing well and are consistently not performing well may come to the conclusion that, you know, that desktop support just isn't my gig. Maybe this isn't my calling. Maybe I need to do something else. And so they are more often than not going to self-attrit out of the organization, meaning that they make up their own mind that this is the wrong position for them and they leave. But at the very least, the feedback is tangible, it's objective, it's quantifiable, and there's no misunderstanding about why you're delivering the feedback that you are delivering on a monthly or quarterly or annual basis. Okay, from Michelle. If a company outsources its help desk/field services, what is the recommendation for creating a balanced scorecard? My recommendation is create it just like I've shown you, but it does require that the outsourcer be willing to provide you with that data, that is all the metrics that are in the scorecard. Now, instead of cost per ticket, you would have price per ticket. That is the price that you are paying to that outsourcer. But they should have all of those metrics, and if they're not providing you with a scorecard on a monthly basis, they should provide you with a scorecard on a monthly basis. You are the customer. You need to ask them, meaning parenthetically, you demand it in a nice way, but the outsourcer should be willing to provide whatever data you ask them for, and if you want a balanced scorecard, you should ask for one, and you should get one, because after all, it is your data. So when we're working with clients who are thinking about outsourcing, we always write into the contract that the client has to provide a monthly balanced scorecard, and we specify the metrics to be included in the scorecard and the weights on those metrics. And when we come into an organization that is already outsourced but does not have a scorecard, we remind the customer that they are the customer and they should ask for what they want. This is not a question of pitting the vendor against the customer or vice versa. It's simply a question of getting the provider, the BPO, the business process outsourcer, on the same page as the customer and getting them to agree to what's important and getting them moving this scorecard in the right direction. So if you've outsourced your service desk or your desktop support or your field services, get your provider, your business process outsourcer, to construct a scorecard. You can show them how it's done, but they ought to be more than willing to create that scorecard on a monthly basis for you and start working towards improving their monthly score. Okay, from Lisa, are example customer and technician satisfaction surveys available for use consideration. We have sample customer sat surveys and sample technician satisfaction surveys, Lisa. If you're interested, send us an email at info@metricnet.com and I can send you those samples. Okay, from Lori, is it possible to be top right quadrant if you use outsourced support? Absolutely. So Lori is referring to that two-dimensional chart. The upper right meant low cost, high customer satisfaction. However, in this particular case, Lori, you're referring to price, not cost, because when you have an outsourcer relationship, you are paying them a price. And so you're not looking at their internal costs, you are looking at the price that you pay them. And to be fair to the outsourcer, since you are, since it is an outsourced relationship, the benchmark ought to be conducted against others who have also outsourced support. So you're comparing your price per ticket or your price per minute of handle time, if you're talking about level 1 support, it isn't really fair to compare an outsourced price per ticket to an in-sourced cost per ticket. That's not a fair comparison unless you are considering in-sourcing what you currently have outsourced. In that case, you're going to look at your price per ticket. Let's just say it's $200 a ticket. You do a benchmark and you determine that, gee, we could do this in-house for $80 a ticket or $90 or $100 per ticket. That's a legitimate comparison if you're doing an economic analysis to determine whether or not you want to in-source something that is currently outsourced. But if you're simply benchmarking your outsourcer, to be fair to them, you ought to be benchmarking against other outsourcers to see if the price-quality trade-off is good and to see if the balanced scorecard with the 6 metrics or the 8 metrics that we showed earlier compares favorably to others who have outsourced. Okay. Question from Donna, and there's only one more after that, so if you have a question, please type it in. Question from Donna is, what is a normal career path progression for desktop support? Donna, usually there's 2 directions. One is a managerial direction where you start like as a tech level 1, you go to tech level 2, then you become a supervisor, then you might become a manager, for example, and oftentimes from there you will move into another position within IT. That's one fairly common path. Another path is what I would call the technical path. That is, you become more proficient technically over time, and your first contact resolution rate increases, your mean times to resolve go down, and you sort of move up that technical career path. So there could be tech level 1, tech level 2, sometimes there's tech tier 1, tech tier 2. So typically what we find in organizations is that there's a managerial career path and a technical career path. The managerial career path oftentimes leads eventually beyond service and support into other jobs in IT. Okay, from Laura, how do you measure if your service desk is first level and perform desk side support well? I'm not sure I understand the question. How do you measure if your service desk is first level and perform desk side? Well, first level doesn't do desk side support, and that's the first thing. They're 2 different things. First level does remote support, desk side does desk side support. So if your service desk is first level and perform desk, so I think the question is, if you're at level 1, how do you determine if desk side support is doing a good job? I guess the short answer is to have desk side support do a benchmark to determine whether or not they're doing a good job of desk side support. I think that's what you're asking. I'm not sure. If you want to retype the question or clarify it for me, I'd be happy to try and re-answer it. But there's another point that I can make while I'm answering that question, which is this. We get asked a lot, does it make sense to have technicians that do both remote support at level 1 as well as desktop support? Some people call it a jump and run model, which means that you're on the call with the customer or doing a chat with the customer. You determine that you can't resolve it remotely, but you believe that you can resolve it on site. So you hang up the phone or you end the chat, you jump out of your seat, you run, not literally, but you go to the site of the user and you fix the problem. Now, those hybrid techs that are cross-trained to do both level 1 support and desktop support, that works in a limited number of circumstances. If your scale is low, and I would define that as having fewer than 20 FTEs, full-time equivalent technicians in both level 1 support and desktop support, if your scale is low, and your user population density is high, which means that you are co-located with your users and you can get to them quickly. If you're off-site, it makes no sense to have technicians that do both desktop support and remote support because you can't get to the end users quickly. But if you are co-located with your end users and it's a high-density population environment, that is, the users are located very close together, and it's low scale, meaning fewer than 20 FTEs in service and support, a hybrid model makes sense. But you don't want to cross-train all of your technicians. Not all of your desktop technicians also have to be able to do level 1 support. Not all of your level 1 support technicians also have to be able to do desktop support. We recommend, the Venn diagram, if you want to look at it that way, the overlap would be about 20%. And that's a good thing because we found that good level 1 technicians don't always make good desktop technicians, and good desktop technicians don't always make good level 1 technicians. But there is an overlap of about 20%, meaning that about 20% who are really good at level 1 can also be good at desktop support and vice versa. So you don't want to cross-train all of them, but to have some cross-trained under those specific circumstances of low scale, high user density, and co-location of service and support with the end users, it does sometimes make sense to have those technicians that do both desktop support and remote support. Okay, question from Virginia. Where would you go to find best practices for desktop strategy and stakeholder communication? Is there a best practice provider or site that we could access? Yeah, at the risk of sounding self-serving, Virginia, I would tell you to go to MetricNet's resource library. If you go to our website, in the main navigation bar up top, you'll see resource library on the right-hand side, or the second from the right choice on the navigation bar. And there's all sorts of resources in there about best practices, stakeholder communication, desktop support, strategy, and I think you'll find a lot of what you need right there. I would also encourage you to look at HDI's website. They have a lot of resources there as well, and if you're not a member of HDI, you might want to consider joining HDI. They're probably the single best association for service support professionals worldwide, and they've got a lot of resources on their website. Okay, that was the last question. If you have any more questions, please type them in. Otherwise, I'll end the webcast momentarily. Thank you, Virginia. Appreciate that comment. All right. Looks like, okay, there's one final question here, and I'm not sure I can answer it, but this is from Dennis or Denise again, and I apologize, but normally Dennis is spelled with 2 N's and Denise is spelled with an E. You have 1 N and there's no E, so I don't know if you're Dennis or Denise, so please, forgive me if I don't get that right. The question is this: how can you handle cheating? Meaning, if you're tracking number of cases closed and then you find out cases created and closed by agents, what would you consider best practices to attack the issue? I don't know. I mean, if it's a one-time occurrence, I'd say you warn the person and you say, look, this just isn't acceptable. If it's common behavior, you've got a big problem within your organization. If there's a lot of that going on, you've got a culture problem. And you need to address that culture problem. Okay, so I'm speaking to Dennis. Thank you Michelle for correcting me. And Dennis, I apologize for not getting your name correct, but I see Michelle's comment here. So cheating, it really depends on whether it's one-off or systemic within the organization, Dennis. If it's one-off, you want to warn the person and make sure that people understand that that's not acceptable. If it's a pervasive problem, you're going to have to take more drastic measures. And if you've got individuals that are consistently, breaking the rules and being unethical, unfortunately, those people have to be asked to leave or told to leave. Okay, so final question from, actually 2 more questions. One from Mitch: which is better correlated to customer satisfaction, net or gross FCR? That's an interesting question. Let me first define the difference between net and gross FCR. First contact resolution rate is what you resolve on first contact divided by some denominator. In gross FCR, the denominator is all incoming contacts. In net FCR, it's all contacts that can potentially be resolved on first contact. So if you go out to the site of the user and it turns out to be a move, add, change, you can't resolve that on first contact, so it doesn't count against you. You carve that out of the denominator. In desktop support, your net FCR is much better correlated with customer satisfaction because the customer understands and sees why certain things can't be resolved on first contact. For level 1 support, the customer sometimes doesn't understand why their hardware break fix can't be resolved on first contact, or their move, add, change can't be resolved on first contact. So in some situations, Mitch, we have seen that net FCR at level 1 is more closely correlated with customer sat, and in other cases we've seen that gross FCR is more correlated with customer sat. And again, the reason is that For remote support, customers tend to view support monolithically. In other words, they don't make a distinction between level 1 support and desktop support. They think you're all just part of the support organization. And if you can't get it done at FCR, something must be wrong, and they're angry about it, even if it's something that couldn't possibly be done at level 1, like, say, a hard drive failure. You can't fix that remotely. But some end users don't make that distinction, and they hold you accountable for everything, in other words, gross FCR. So I've seen it go both ways. More educated user populations tend to see a better correlation with net FCR and customer satisfaction. Less educated end user populations, you tend to see a stronger correlation between gross FCR and customer satisfaction. Okay. All right, Dennis, thank you for that clarification. Your parents spell your name with one N, so I'll blame them. But I really appreciate you coming to our webcast. And in fact, for all of those, and it looks like most of you did remain on until the very end here through the Q&A, I just want to thank you once again. I do hope that you found our webcast to be informative and insightful. Don't forget to fill out the questionnaire that will pop up when you exit the GoToWebinar, just 3 questions. And if you answer that, we'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Also, don't forget to go to our website, go to the resource library page. If you're not yet a MetricNet Premium member, please fill out the form. It's free, and it gives you access to everything on our website absolutely free of charge. So thank you once again. This concludes our webcast. Goodbye now.